leadership. About 18 months ago, Rob Holmes, who you've heard from already, and I were at an event, and we got some feedback in terms of the fact that there are many challenges that leaders have every day in their workplace, in their lives, and in the community. It started an idea that we needed to provide something and a platform and a place where people can come to discuss those wicked thoughts, a safe place, a place where engaging with others that face the same challenges, and hence wicked leadership. Our day is about exploring some of those challenges individually as leaders, working through some ideas, sharing ideas, talking to others, talking to the speakers and experts that are in the room, and of course, not only are there experts in our speakers, there are other experts in the room, and of course, you are experts in your own life. You are experts in the challenges you have as a leader, and you're an expert in the things that interrupt, and you're an expert in the things that work for you. And so, we want to make sure that we explore that today, and that you leave at the end of the day with an idea, courage, and support from those that are in the room as well, to go and make a dent, do something with growth. Why we need wicked leadership. I've acknowledged the traditional owners of the land. I actually need to acknowledge my daughter, who is celebrating her birthday today. She said, "Dad, you've organised this party, but you didn't invite me," so she crashed the party, and she's at the back. It's her 22nd birthday today.
Happy birthday.
And we're not going to sing. That'll be later. So why wicked leadership? There's a word cloud of all the things that you responded to in terms of our question when you registered for the event, and they range from you as an individual, your own challenges personally. They range from those organisational challenges that exist in your organisations. They are about how do you develop staff, how do you develop capability, how do you manage resources, how do you manage generational differences. All of those challenges present as sometimes wicked problems and those that are complex. You know, complex issues are when there is actually no relationship between the cause and the effect. Sometimes we assume that everything is a complex and wicked problem. But the reality, some are just complicated. Some it's about the time that we have available to actually deal with what's going on. It's about the time to think about that issue. It's the time to focus on that issue. It's time to actually get time out to focus on that issue, or to think about other things, or take care of other things that make sure that you're capable of dealing with them. It's actually 55 years ago last week that JFK stood at Rice University and made the Man to the Moon speech. If you haven't watched it, it's worth going back and watching it. For me, it's inspirational in terms of how far man has come in the known history of what we've worked out over 50,000 years. And he talks about where they were 55 years ago, and you just think about they hadn't put a man on the moon and where we are today, and I know our speakers are going to touch on some of those issues. You think about the challenge of sending a man to the moon, sitting back in 1962, and it was sort of 7 years later that 6.5 in fact, that they achieved that in February of 67. If I sat here in 1962 and talked about or thought about how I was going to get to the moon, definitely a complex issue, definitely a complex problem to solve. But how? How would you solve it? The reality is that they went forward and they worked backwards. We've got a man on the moon. What was the next thing that happened, or the thing that happened just before that got us there? And they walked back through every part of that. Our ability sometimes to make sense of all that's going on and break down such a big thing into small bits is challenging, and it takes time. They actually called it I think I'm correct in saying, the warehouse of ideas. And effectively they said, okay, so the man in the moon is that big, let's deal with that bit first. And then let's deal with that bit. And then having got that bit, let's work through that bit. And eventually, back to the early 60s, basically had the plan and knowing what they had to do. The funding risk to put a man on the moon, the time risk, were well above the margins that those that do project management used. They were in the order of 100% in terms of time and almost 100% in terms of budget. All managed though, moving a man from there to there. So the number one challenge we have is that we fail to let patterns emerge. Time is such of the essence. Funny old thing though, there's only 168 hours in a week. It doesn't change from that week to that week to that week. Time management doesn't work. It's about priorities. What do I actually need to spend the time at, and actually when things are going on, sometimes letting things emerge can often be a better way. You heard my story about technically trained, responding to that situation on the bridge of the ship off the coast, and it was necessary for me to know the answer. There were a set of rules that decided how I was going to manoeuvre the ship. And often we feel, when we've been highly technically trained as a professional, that there's only one right answer based upon what I've seen before. But when it comes to complex issues, best practice is not the solution. It's actually novel practice. It's about doing something, seeing what happens, and then acting upon that new information and data. The pressure to solve it now. I worked in the Department of Defence for 37 years. At the senior level, there was always a deadline. There was always a problem they had to solve. There was always that political challenge and issue and a demand that meant there was no time, and the problem needed to be solved now. The consequence of solving it now sometimes can be a misuse of resources. Expenditure of resources that, with a little bit more time and effort, you might find out that actually there were alternatives, there were other options. There wasn't just one solution. Thinking that failure is bad. My best story around this is who's seen the movie Apollo 13? Who remembers the scene when they've got the problem? What did they say? Houston, we have a problem, but they wouldn't say failure is not an option. So often, organisations can feel like failure is not an option. And in fact, the political consequence of failure can be significant. Reputation failure can be significant. But if you think about some of the complex issues that we have when we're dealing with people, sometimes you need to actually think about it and work on the basis that actually, I'm not going to get to the solution unless I make a mistake here. If you go back to the space program and getting a man on the moon, there were lots of little mistakes along the way. There was lots of failure. They tried things, and even in that thing on, even that scene on Apollo 13, they tried things to get to the solution. Failure might not be an option at the end, but it's okay in between. It's okay to actually make mistakes. And as leaders, we need to create that environment in our workplaces, actually in our homes, and in some ways in the community to pick people up and say, actually, that's okay, well, we can solve that. How good does it feel when it says, it's okay, we can solve that, rather than that demonstrative squash down that comes sometimes when failure is seen as bad. Solve with linear thinking. For my mind, the linear thinking starts here and then it's looking that way. Thinking that there's a direct path from 62 to 67. The reality is that there are many paths, there will be many directions, and again, emergence occurs when I change direction. Emergence occurs when I create space for other ideas. And if we just have that linear thinking that comes from best practice, perhaps, then we are not going to see the novel practice that we actually need to solve the problem. Best practice. We use it all the time, and it gets used randomly as the solution. You know, you're in the meeting, yes, best practice. We used that last year, that will work. Maybe not. Maybe there's an option that you've got to explore that actually includes not having that. And as leaders, when you're in large organisations, thinking that you have to control every step. Can we do that? I walked on to the ship I had command of in 2002. It was 8:30 in the morning in Burnie, Tasmania. This was the highlight of my career after about 20-something years, and I was pretty excited. The unexciting bit was that I actually never been to sea on this platform. There were systems in that ship that I didn't know about. And sometimes when it comes to problems, we've actually got to trust the team we've got around us. I handed over the ship, or took over the ship in 2.5 hours. At 11:30, the ship sailed with 250 people on board, and I was ultimately responsible. But you know what? Could I control everything that was going to happen in that first day, first week, first month? No way. We have to trust people to get on and do a certain job, and we have to create an environment where they feel confident to go and talk about what just happened. Come back with the bad feedback, come back with the mistakes and all of those kind of things. That ship got away from the wharf not because I was great. I was the captain, and with that comes certain power and position and authority. But if I acted like that, do you think people would have done what needed their jobs, what they needed to do?
First number.
Most likely not. So sometimes questions are the answers. Sometimes it's not about having all the answers when we're a leader. Sometimes it's about the ability to ask good questions. What questions do you have that work with people? What's the conversation we're not having? Would that not open up a conversation about things that others had, the ideas that they might have to solve that particular wicked problem? I think it would. I look forward to discussing what questions you might have about the wicked problems and wicked challenges you have.